How do you guys feel about the sound of of crows in the background? Pretty sure we're experiencing a visitation here, but I'm gonna get started anyway. I feel like it's kind of Christmassy. The crow's a Christmas symbol, isn't it? Probably for some culture. Anyway, welcome to today's teaching. This one's called "Make Christmas Weird Again," and just want to start by saying that I totally love Christmas, and that I know I ought to be, like any good pastor, complaining about consumerism and the busyness of the season and the way that life in this late stage capitalism society that we live in is causing us to miss the point of the season and all that. But to be honest, I don't know. I don't mind a little chaos, and I love giving and receiving gifts, and I kind of dig the fact that Home Depot put their Christmas stuff out, that Memorial Day this year. But I do have concerns, like many of my brethren, that we are missing the point, that there is maybe something a little bit off about the way that we celebrate the meaning of the season. But my concerns are biblical in nature, per usual. Let me explain. So when I read the accounts of Jesus' birth, as they're actually recorded in the Gospels, I quickly realize that in order to maintain the hallmark version of the story that we've been handed, we have to gloss over a lot of details that are honestly nothing short of profoundly destabilizing to the evangelical interpretations that have become the status quo. This is actually a reliable pattern. Philosopher Schopenhauer wrote that all truth passes through three stages. First, it's ridiculed. Second, it's violently opposed. Third, it's accepted as being self-evident. And if I may add, fourth, it's domesticated, its meaning reduced to one acceptable interpretation, and the seeds of the revolution that it originally planted are forced back underground. A mentor of C.S. Lewis, a guy called G.K. Chesterton, once said, "The Christian ideal has not been tried and found wanting. It's been found difficult and left untried." And what is the Christian ideal that is exemplified in the Christmas story and then modeled throughout Christ's life here on earth? If we're going to boil it down to a couple of key expressions, it would be just radical acceptance, complete inclusion, the insistence that the divine life is present in all people, in all places, in all circumstances. Yeah, even, them over there. As is ever the case, that which you most need to find is going to be found in whatever place you'd least like to look for it. That's Carl Jung. So this morning's theme is just going to be a little exploration around this observation that maybe the Christmas story is so sticky, not only because it's comforting and familiar, but because it's kind of like a Trojan horse. It's sneaking in some material that's actually deeply destabilizing to the human ego and to the tradition, Christianity, that's been built atop this story, but resonates deeply with our soul, because we've got the sanitized version that we're all familiar with, and because we're familiar with it and because it's warm and fuzzy, it sneaks past our defenses, carrying a deeper, more provocative wisdom that contains the potential to actually wake us up. If you think about these stories that never seem to go away, the ancient myths, the fairy tales, the parables of Christ, they're not just nice. Most of them are actually pretty dark. child endangerment and infanticide, of all things, are somehow common themes. There are plenty of tales about immortal gods getting busy with mortal women, and in a lot of these stories, the lines are blurred, or the concept of consent is outright missing. Thankfully, the Christmas story is not one such tale. Oftentimes, the hero dies or endures a level of suffering that is disturbing. If half of the myths and most of the Bible was just like told straight and not sanitized and cleaned up and run through these filters, like, it just, to be honest, it'd be canceled in today's culture. It wouldn't pass the criteria. So why do they survive? I mean, I'm sure, we're not living through the first cancel culture moment as a species. So how do they survive? It's because psychologically they work on two levels. On the surface, they're simple enough for a child to hear and understand. And they're repeated in a way where they become familiar and comforting. But underneath, they reveal principles about fear, injustice, inclusion, freedom, the cost of freedom, that, as we get a little bit older, you start to feel like, oh, I can't, ain't nobody got time for that right now. And so the ego, the part of us that loves control and predictability, that flattens the whole thing, smooths out the complexity, and reduces the meaning of the story to something simple that usually boils down to like, oh, thank goodness I'm on the inside of God's salvation plan. But the deeper self, the soul, hears the Christmas story and remembers that it's actually a pretty radical tale about the way the presence of God upsets the hierarchies and the systems. And it's easy to kind of like rage against the machine, but the hierarchies and the systems, the empires that are in need of dismantling, aren't just around us, they're within us. And they're pretty much anything that we believe or that we cling to, that we hold on to, that helps us feel safe. And most of the time, like all empires, they have a shadow. They come at a cost, and usually the cost is the exclusion of others, either other actual people or other aspects of ourself, our own shadow. So the deeper self, the soul, hears the Christmas story and remembers that it's actually a blessing when the presence of God disrupts the hierarchies and the systems that give us a sense of meaning and safety by means of judgment, limitation, and exclusion. Because it's actually good and developmentally necessary to spend some time outside of these systems, outside of these hierarchies, even though it feels profoundly unsafe sometimes to do so. Because that's the only way that we can begin to remember the truth, which is that the divine presence is active and oftentimes even more integrated in the kind of people, places, and things, circumstances, and situations that we've been trained to avoid. Because, if you read the story at face value, the Christmas story appears to be about God engaging with the wrong people who are living in the wrong places and using the wrong spiritual tools. Now, our ego doesn't want to look at it that way, and so we got to do all kinds of weird mental tricks to avoid having to do so. But our soul remembers that it's in those people, places, situations, and circumstances where the combination of longing and humility are present. That's where God's experienced. Hunger and humility are the exact conditions that allow us, any of us, anyone, to receive the divine presence without immediately slotting it into our prefabricated notions of what God is and isn't up to. I mean, feel free to fact check me here, but I'm pretty sure the Christmas story we read that Jesus, the Son of God, is born to an unmarried teenage girl. That Eastern astrologers, using practices that are explicitly forbidden in the scriptures, are the first ones to locate and honor Christ without an Orthodox Jew in sight. Preferential treatment seems to be given to blue-collared workers and refugees instead of religious professionals and bureaucrats, who would be the kind of people who could actually comprehend the meaning of the message and then have the social clout or status to be able to get the word out about it. So, Mom, I promise I'm not just being edgy here for the sake of being edgy. It's just that I've lived long enough now to recognize that it's usually the parts of the story that make us least comfortable that are the parts we most need to hear. Maybe our current discomfort, really in any area of life, isn't a problem. It's actually the manger, where Christ is seeking to be born in us again. Matthew 2 reads, "After Jesus was born in Bethlehem, Magi from the east came to Jerusalem, and they asked, 'Where is the one who's been born, the King of the Jews? We saw a star when it rose, and we've come to worship him.'" Magi, what's that sound like to you? Magic? Sounds like magic, right? It's just missing one letter. You're onto something there. Magi is a Greek word from an ancient Persian root, magos, meaning member of a priestly tribe. Magi is also linked to an Indo-European root meaning to be able to have power. Matthew's original audience would have pictured Eastern ritual experts, astrologer priests, the kind of people Israel usually associated with foreign religion and forbidden spiritual arts. Sorcerers, magicians, star priests. Whatever the word means, it certainly doesn't mean, Bible study leaders. So the first people to seek Christ are non-Jewish, non-Torah keeping, star-reading spiritual seekers from another religion. And our scriptures, as far as Matthew records, doesn't say that, it was just like dumb luck that they happened to find Jesus, and once they arrived, God rebuked them and said, "There's just no way you're getting close to my son until you burn those star charts of yours." It's not what it says. Instead, surprise, their forbidden religious practice leads them directly to Christ, while the Jewish theologians sit around in the temple and debate orthodoxy. Now, if I imagine a small band of occult-minded spiritual seekers who self-identify as sorcerers showing up at really any church that I was a part of growing up and telling us, hey, this might sound kind of strange, but we were consulting the horoscope this morning, and all of us felt pretty strongly that Lord Vishnu told us to come here and join you. They would not have been enthusiastically received. They would have been handed a pamphlet on the dangers of the occult and politely escorted out the door. But in our actual scriptures, sky reading is the exact practice that leads the Magi to Christ, and the language of it, the specifics of it, aren't sanitized before they're included in the Bible. Oh, wait a minute. Didn't Jewish law and then later Christian tradition explicitly forbid this sort of practice? Why, yes. Yes, it did. Moses forbids worshiping the sun, moon, and stars, or divining by them in Deuteronomy 4, and then he says it again in Deuteronomy 18, in case you missed it. The prophets spend a fair amount of energy mocking those who rely on the stars to interpret spiritual puzzles, especially Isaiah. Isaiah's got a pretty pronounced sarcastic streak. Paul picks up on this theme in the New Testament, and I seem to recall members of my Baptist church growing up taking the horoscopes in the magazine section at the grocery store and turning them around so that you saw the ads on the back of the page rather than the horoscope to deter people from engaging with it. I'm just trying to say that, like, Babylonian star priests wouldn't have been, like, in the Jewish imagination, like the heroes of the story. They'd be the kind of people that you warned your teenager to avoid. And beautifully, this is actually another reliable pattern in the scriptures. The Bible, if you just read it, it seems to be a lot less concerned about contradicting itself than we've been led to believe. The Bible, if you read it how it's written, it appears to be like a work in progress, just like us. And there are laws routinely stated that are important, that they're for a reason. And just as often as these laws are routinely stated, there are stories, narratives, poetry included in the same book that seem to contradict those laws. I mean, Ruth, the book of Ruth, is basically a case study on this exact pattern. So Matthew's writing to a primarily Jewish audience, and he has a pronounced antagonistic streak towards the religious ruling class, who had hermetically sealed themselves inside their strict interpretation of Scripture. You know, nobody gets in and nobody gets out. You may recall one of Jesus' famous lines to the Pharisees and the Sadducees, who up until very recently I had always pictured as sort of like a band of cruel ne'er-do-wells who appeared out of nowhere to harass Jesus. But that's not that. They would have been his mentors and his friends and his pastors and his, college professor. We don't know much about Jesus' childhood except for that he was always in temple. And so the harassment that he receives at the hands of the Pharisees, I think it's important to pause for a minute and realize that these weren't strangers that were giving him a hard time. They were the folks that used to heap accolades on him as, a star student. So one afternoon, Jesus had kind of like hit his limit on hypocrisy, and this is what he said to the religious leaders. This is John 5. He said, "Diligently you search the scriptures because you believe that they'll lead you to life. These same scriptures testify about me, and yet you refuse to come to me to receive the very life that you claim to seek." See, God speaks to us through the language of our longing, not through the language of our certainty. Religion trains us to be certain about certain things, and those certain things that it trains us to be certain about are certainly things we can never actually be certain about. As a result, we learn to doubt ourselves and to trust the professionals. And by extension, we delay actually, becoming ourselves, which is, as far as I can tell, that's about the closest thing to the purpose or the meaning of life that there is. Expressing the divine presence through the prism of your own individual uniqueness. I mean, just look at the story. The astrologers, they're squarely on their own path, and they're not confronted at any time in this story to, get off that path and jump on a new one. They trust the sky, so God guides them using a star. They honor sacred symbols, so God gives them one. They know how to follow omens across deserts, and so God lets that skill carry them to Christ. So the takeaway for us, that if God seems unbothered by the spiritual practices of Babylonian sorcerers, we can probably stop worrying so much about our neighbor who reads tarot or our friend who's spiritual but not religious. This doesn't mean, obviously, that every practice is helpful or useful or, inherently safe. But what it seems to definitely mean is that God can't be contained to one religious expression. That revelation isn't confined to the people who have the right doctrine. That oftentimes the people who have the right doctrine have the most difficult time with revelation because, have you ever read the book of Revelation? It's an upending. So, I don't know, maybe the primary takeaway for today is just a reminder that the divine is experienced anywhere there's hunger and humility, even when mixed with confusion and even when expressed in practices that make you uncomfortable. If we let the story speak for itself, we see that it's encouraging us to be vulnerable and humble like God, born in a manger to a couple of refugees. If anything's dangerous in here, I think what's being pointed out is that it's dangerous to reduce the story to the Son of God was born in a manger in Bethlehem about 2,000 years ago, when the rest of the New Testament seems to express what Meister Eckhart summarized in a sermon he gave some 1,500 years ago called The Eternal Birth of the Son and the Soul. He writes, "We are all meant to be mothers of God. What good is it to me if this eternal birth of the divine Son takes place unceasingly but does not take place within myself? What good is it to me if Mary is full of grace if I'm not also full of grace? What good is it to me for the Creator to give birth to his Son if I do not also give birth to him in my time and my culture? This, then, is the fullness of time. What is today? Today is eternity. Now is the hour, and this is the place for birthing the Son, as Mary once did. We are all meant to be mothers of God." Remember, Jesus said that, "And you will know a tree by the level of orthodoxy within the books sitting on its shelves." It's not what he said. He said, "You'll know a tree by its fruit." Hunger and humility is the ground and the soil for the experience of God. All the rest of it is just stuff we make up to try to explain what none of us can ever truly understand. So, may this bring you a measure of peace. And may we have the courage to hang out in our discomfort for long enough that it might actually have the chance to transform our lives and allow us to participate ever more deeply in the profoundly disruptive, eternally present, unceasingly loving divine life in the here and now. Merry Christmas. Mwah. We'll see you around.